Have you ever just stared at your bank account and wondered why some people seem to effortlessly build wealth while others are permanently trapped living paycheck to paycheck? Well, welcome to another explainer. Today, we are unpacking Robert Kiyosaki's foundational personal finance philosophy from his massively influential book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, fair warning, this material is going to fundamentally challenge almost everything we're traditionally taught about money, wealth, and education. So if you're ready to crack the code on financial independence, you are in the exact right place.
Okay, let's dive right in by looking at a pretty radical contrast in mindsets. Kiyosaki actually grew up with two very different father figures. His biological father, who he calls his poor dad, was highly educated, we're talking a PhD-level guy, who believed deeply in traditional job security. But his best friend's father, his rich dad, was an 8th grade dropout. Yet, he was a financial genius who eventually became one of the wealthiest men in Hawaii. One dad tells you to study hard to find a good company to work for. The other says, study hard so you can find a good company to buy. It's a completely different lens on how the world works.
To make sense of all this, we're going to map out this paradigm shift across 6 distinct sections today. A tale of two dads, assets versus liabilities, how the rich make money, what it means to mind your own business, the history of taxes and corporations, and finally, overcoming financial obstacles. Let's get started.
Section 1. A Tale of Two Dads, Contrasting Mindsets. So, as a young boy, having two strong fathers offering totally opposing advice forced Kiyosaki to consciously choose which worldview he was going to adopt. And he realized super early on that we shape our lives primarily through our thoughts. For example, a simple shift in language creates a massive shift in reality. His poor dad would look at something expensive and simply say, "I can't afford it." It's a definitive statement, right? It literally shuts down the mind. It puts the brain to sleep. But his rich dad, he absolutely forbade those words. He insisted on asking, "How can I afford it?" Just shifting from a flat statement to an open question transforms financial fear into a mental workout. It forces your brain, the most powerful computer in the world, to actively search for solutions and opportunities.
Moving right along to Section 2, Assets versus Liabilities, the Core Framework.
This brings us to the absolute core framework of this entire explainer. Seriously, if you take away just one thing today, it should be the mechanical difference between how the wealthy and the middle class operate. You can forget about complicated accounting terms and giant spreadsheets. The source material emphasizes the KISS principle. Keep it super simple. An asset puts money in your pocket, a liability takes money out of your pocket. That's literally it. The rich buy assets. The middle class often buys things like brand new cars, giant TVs, or massive primary residences, mistakenly thinking they're assets. But in reality, they're just liabilities draining their bank accounts. It all comes down to the direction of your cash flow. When you look at the cash flow of a true asset in practice, you'll see a very specific pattern. The flow originates down in the asset column of your balance sheet and shoots straight up directly into your income column. Things like real estate producing rent or dividend-paying stocks. These are true assets because they independently generate cash flow without requiring your physical, everyday labor. On the flip side, look at the cash flow pattern of a liability. The flow originates at the bottom in the liability column. Think of a heavy house mortgage, a high-interest car loan, or mounting credit card debt. And it bleeds right out of your expense column. It's actively draining your finances dry. This is exactly the trap that keeps so many people stuck in the traditional rat race, working endlessly just to service their debts month after month.
Let's transition over to Section 3, The Rich Make Money, having money work for you.
You see, the wealthy don't simply wait around hoping for a tiny 3% pay raise from their boss. The crucial point here is that the poor and the middle class work for money, but the rich have money work for them. Working for a standard salary means you're largely driven by fear and desire, and the government always taxes you first before you see a single dime. The rich, however, leverage their financial literacy to legally invent money. They understand that money is largely an agreement, an illusion really, and they use their minds to create systems that generate it entirely on their own terms.
Now, to truly have money work for you, you've got to deeply understand the 3 types of income. The source makes it clear that ordinary earned income, your standard 9-to-5 paycheck, is actually the most heavily taxed and the absolute hardest path to true wealth because you're constantly trading your time for money. The real secret to financial freedom is learning to convert that ordinary earned income into portfolio income like stocks and bonds or passive income like real estate that pays you rent while you sleep as fast as humanly possible. The rich focus almost entirely on building up those bottom 2 income streams.
Which brings us to Section 4, Mind your own business, the difference between your profession and your business.
To really grasp this concept, think about Ray Kroc, the guy who founded McDonald's. He famously told a group of business students that his real business wasn't making hamburgers, it was real estate. And that is the vital difference between your profession and your business. Minding your own business doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit your job and launch some risky startup. It means keeping your day job, but relentlessly pouring your excess money into your personal asset column. Think of every single dollar that goes into your asset column as your own personal employee, working 24 hours a day to make you even more money.
Next up is Section 5, Taxes and Corporations, the controversial world of wealth protection. Now we're getting into a highly debated historical perspective on wealth protection that truly separates the financially literate from everyone else. Why do we even have taxes in the first place? Well, the author explains that income taxes weren't initially permanent. They were originally sold to the voting masses in England and the US as a way to punish the wealthy. But over time, the government's appetite for money just kept growing, and those tax laws ultimately trickled down. They ended up punishing the very middle class and poor who enthusiastically voted for them to begin with.
To accurately report on the book's narrative here, Kiyosaki's rich dad actually had a pretty controversial take. He believed the whole take from the rich mentality of Robin Hood was fundamentally flawed. He called Robin Hood a crook. Why? Because the wealthy don't just sit there and let themselves be heavily taxed. They simply use their financial intelligence to rewrite the rules. They utilize legal loopholes to outsmart the system and aggressively protect their wealth.
So how exactly do they outsmart the system? Well, the rich use the legal structure of a corporation as a shield, and a corporation isn't necessarily some big glass building with hundreds of employees. A lot of the time, it's just a legal document sitting in a file folder. The massive advantage here is the order of operations. A corporation earns money, spends everything it legally can with pre-tax dollars, and then only pays taxes on whatever's left over. An individual employee, on the other hand, earns money, gets taxed first, and tries to survive on what's left. It's a literal game changer for wealth accumulation.
By utilizing financial IQ, which is really a blend of accounting, investing, understanding markets, and the law, the rich retain the ultimate power over their money. If you work purely for a paycheck, you are completely surrendering your power to your employer and to the tax collector. But if you build financial literacy and have money work for you, you keep the power and you control your own destiny.
Finally, we reach Section 6, Overcoming Financial Obstacles, Breaking Through Psychological Blocks.
We really have to look at behavioral transformations here, because even highly financially literate people often fail to build abundant assets due to some deep-seated psychological blocks. The first huge roadblock is fear, especially the fear of ostracism. The fear of standing out or not keeping up with the Joneses. Then there's arrogance. The author notes something pretty surprising. Arrogance is often just an ego-driven shield used to hide financial ignorance. If you don't understand something, don't pretend you do. And of course, bad habits. The wealthy maintain incredibly strict habits that prioritize their asset growth above absolutely everything else.
The ultimate test of this mental fortitude is self-discipline, specifically the habit of paying yourself first. This means routing your money directly into your asset column before you pay a single bill or tax. When you commit to this, you get financially and mentally stronger. It builds this incredible internal fortitude that absolutely refuses to let the world or your creditors push you around.
When you put that discipline into action, the cash flow bypasses your expenses completely at first. It routes straight down into the asset column to save and invest. Kiyosaki actually argues that even if doing this means creditors are banging on your door, you should use that very pressure. Let it inspire your financial genius to invent brand new ways to make money to pay those bills rather than ever liquidating your precious income-producing assets. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought. True wealth is not an accident. It's the result of continuous, daily financial education and intense discipline. So ask yourself, based on everything we've just uncovered today about cash flow and financial IQ, are the financial choices you're making right now actively building an asset that will work for you, or are they just feeding a liability that you're going to have to keep working for? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.